So let's talk about some different ways that we can encourage smart growth and combat some of the urban sprawl issues. So there's a number of different ways that you can reduce the impact of development, and a lot of it has to do with transportation and how people get around. So if we can plan our communities around mass transit, for example, then that encourages people to take mass transit. So people who live in transit-oriented developments, in other words, developments that are planned around a mass transit system, are 2 to 5 times more likely to use mass transit. That's critically important, right? If we can get people on this mass transit, that's less cars that are on the road. We also know that if we double the population density of an area, that reduces household vehicle traffic by 5 to 12%, and that's because these areas are more likely to have access to mass transit and or biking or walking to areas nearby that would have shopping or work opportunities. And then finally, if we design streets and bike paths safely, so a nice wide bike path, pedestrian bridges over roads, etc., that encourages people to walk or bike. So this leads to less cars on the road, which is less air pollution. And then also the other side benefit of this is that the more walking and biking people do, the better health that they're in. It's also important to look at how we build buildings. So if we retrofit old commercial buildings so that they're more efficient, that can save 50 to 70% of the energy that they use normally for heating and cooling and just running the building's operations. And if you retrofit a building, that reduces the amount of materials that you need compared to building a new building. Also, when we're planning where to put new buildings and developments, if you put them next to other developments, then that will protect more undeveloped lands, and so it keeps our streams and wetlands and coastlines cleaner. There's also a movement to put in more permeable soils and pavements, and these can help to filter runoff and prevent flooding, because we said when it rains on normal pavement, that water just rushes off of it like a sheet into storm drains, and so the water gets to the river or the stream or whatever's collecting all of that drainage more quickly, and it can cause surges and flooding. Another unique idea that is really taking hold is this idea of garden rooftops and plantings in cities, and these help in a number of ways. So they help to combat the urban heat island effect, because this roof is no longer just absorbing the heat energy from the sun. Now that heat energy is hitting a much less focused surface with these plants. These plants are respiring and giving off water and cooling down the environment around them. These rooftop gardens and plantings in cities also help to filter the rainfall and runoff coming off of the building. And the reminder that if we can keep more natural lands and farmlands undeveloped, then that's better than that helps, because once you develop that land, it's very unlikely that it will return back to farmland or natural land. There's not a lot of data yet on this, but we do know that the studies that have been done are showing us that the built environment can influence the amount of physical activity that people have. And so 90% of the studies that have been done in this area have found a positive association. So it might not be cause and effect, but it is an association or correlation that shows that the built environment can affect how much people exercise and also affect their weight. And so if we can build, we said, safe walking and biking conditions, that encourages people to be more active and embrace healthier lifestyles. So for this lecture, we'll close with the 10 principles of smart growth, and this is really just a summary of some of the things we've already talked about, but it's nice to see them in one area as these 10 principles. this is a list that's available on the Smart Growth website, or the EPA also has the same list, so they worked hand in hand to generate this list of 10 principles. The first principle is that we should have mixed land uses. That means that homes are close to offices where people work, which is close to schools, which is close to parks, shops, and restaurants. And that way it's a one-stop shop, basically, where you're within one big block you can access your school and your park and the shops and restaurants, and that way you're not having to travel long distances to access these different things. Also, when we're building up instead of out helps to decrease the footprint of the buildings. And if we can build on underutilized or vacant lots, that also helps to do infill development instead of branching out into a larger surface area over the landscape. It also helps to put diverse housing options in one area, so that way you can have smaller homes for young couples who are just starting and older folks who don't have families, and so mix those smaller homes in with larger homes for people who have larger groups living in a home. And it also mixes income levels, and so that makes it more accessible for, if you have an office area where a lot of people work, they're all going to have different income levels and different needs, and that way they can all access that work area, and they don't have to travel. Certain groups won't have to travel in to work. Walkable neighborhoods are key for getting people out and walking, and then that way they don't have to drive as much. So if you can make safe sidewalks and ped bridges for walking over roadways, that helps to make neighborhoods more walkable. And then this is a quote I took off the Smart Growth website. Another principle is to foster distinctive, attractive communities with a strong sense of place. So each community does have kind of a different feeling to it, and so they're saying, make these a place that attracts certain populations of people that want to live in a community that's maybe really focused on, maybe some people really like to live near a certain type of park, or they want to live near a certain type of company, and so, build your community so that people want to live there and enjoy living there and want to stay. The sixth principle we talked about is protecting farmlands, open spaces, and critical habitats. And so if we develop close in and not spread out as much, we can protect these spaces. And that helps, these open spaces and farmlands help to moderate temperatures in a region. They help to prevent erosion and protect water quality. They also help provide more demand for housing and tourists. So if you have a nice big park area in kind of next to in a development, people like to go there and visit. It also helps to provide natural habitats for animals and plants, so if we preserve these spaces, then these natural populations can continue to coexist with people. 7 kind of matches up with 6, develop within existing communities, so try not to spread out, but instead fill in places that haven't been developed. So sometimes you'll drive by a neighborhood and there will be empty lots next to houses, so fill in these empty lots before you spread out into another area that you can develop. A selection of options for transportation, that refers to having different options available for people. So some people want to take mass transit, other people would rather ride their bikes. So if you have bike lanes and access to public transportation and roads and sidewalks for pedestrians, people have choices about how they get around. Also, there's a movement all across the globe. This is not just a first world issue or a developing country issue, but that people need access to fair and cost-effective housing, and that is helped if local governments are able to provide very clear laws about how development occurs, where it occurs, because then developers, when they go to apply to develop an area, they know what the laws are, and it's easier to get them through, and it's easier to be creative about how you plan a new community. And then finally, always encourage community involvement in development decisions so that all the different stakeholders are at the table and talking about how things should be built and where they should be built.